Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the workshop. It is fantastic to have you here as ever, because on today's episode, we're going to be taking a $7 Harbor Freight hammer and making it perform like a beautiful forged $200 hammer. Before we jump in, let's thank today's sponsor, which is Raid Shadow Legends, for making all of this possible. Raid is a dark fantasy RPG game that reminds me of a lot of those old school role-player games back in the day, like Final Fantasy, which is fantastic. You've been hearing about Raid Shadow Legends all over the internet, I'm sure, but have you actually played it? Because now is the time to try. Here we go. Look at these beasts. Okay, oh, it's a dismantle. There we go. Thrill of the hunt. Oh, he's down. Oh, get him. No! No, they're attacking me. No! There we go, he's down. I think that guy's pretty strong. He's not wanting to go down. There we go, and we're through. You can get whatever you want from the game, whether it is that you want to socialize and fight alongside teammates, or whether you want to fight PvP against other players. You can enjoy collecting champions and just have an all-around great time. And right now is the time to try it. Because if you have Amazon Prime, especially before March 22nd, when you log in, you're going to be getting 3 Void Shards and 4 Superior Void Potions. So Amazon Prime members, be sure to go and claim your loot now. But regardless, you can get great bonuses by hitting my link in the description down below. You're going to be getting 100,000 free silver, an energy refill, 50 gems, and an epic champion. Look at this guy. He's awesome. It's the Executioner. Over the next 30 days, you're going to be getting extra rewards in your inbox, so be sure to stay tuned. Look at this champion. He's got a Zweihänder, just like the sword we're working on now. We are having a little pause this week, but this is epic. This is super cool champion Crusader. Check it out now and enjoy it for free on iOS or Android, as well as on PC. And it'll work seamlessly between PC and mobile. The links are in the description. We're very grateful for Raid sponsoring this. Let's jump in and turn a $7 hammer into one that performs like a $200 one. Okie dokie, so here's what we have hammer-wise. From Harbor Freight, and costing a whopping $7, right here is a Pittsburgh 3-pound sledgehammer with a 16-inch hardwood handle. We also have a Pittsburgh 3-pound cross-bead hammer next to some forged blacksmithing hammers. Let's have a closer look. Alrighty, let me tell you some of the problems I see with the $7 hammer. Start off with, the handle was loose off the shelf. As it came from the store, it had a loose handle, and when you're forging, you don't want the head of the hammer to be rattling around, and it can also end up being a little bit of a safety hazard, because if the head flies off, it could hit you or somebody, or put a hole in the wall or a window. No fun. The wobbly handle here is caused because the fit between the handle and the eye, the hole of the hammer, is really imprecise. So much so that they've actually jammed some epoxy, it looks like, in there, but it wasn't an epoxy strong enough to actually hold it to the head, which is a shame. So it wobbles around. No good. The biggest gripe, however, is how the faces come. The faces come very flat with just one chamfer around it, meaning that though it's chamfered here, it still has a very sharp transition between the flat and that chamfer. So if you go to forge with it, you're going to be putting a few extra hammer marks in your work that are going to be a lot more difficult to get out. It also has 2 identical faces. Obviously, that's normal for this style of hammer, but I am quite partial to the rounding hammer with 1 rounding face and 1 flat face with much wider radii on the edges so that you're able to have a much better degree of control over the steel and mitigate the risk of nuisance hammer marks. But with all that said, a hammer is just a lump of metal on a stick, and even with the $7 hammer from Harbor Freight, you can still make stuff. Because it's a whole lot more about knowing how to make it than it is about the tools used. So let's make something. In a quick and dirty 2 heats, we're still able to make something. The hammer moves steel. It forges. The loose head threw me off a little bit, but I was able to forge a decent taper, do a quick isolation, all without a problem. The only downside is as I tried to forge out the leaf itself, those edges of the hammer really came to bite me, and that's those rather unsightly marks that you're seeing. And so we're going to tackle some of these issues. First things first, we're going to fix that handle fit, see if we need to make a new handle, see if we can fix what we've already got. and then we're gonna tackle the facets. First things first, I'm gonna cut off this little rag right here where the sharp head is peeling up the wood. The gap in the handle is so bad, I can fit this knife blade all the way down it. I don't know if we're gonna be able to fix it. That's what you get for $7. To see if we can fix it, I'm gonna drive the handle further into the head. And that is the downside to this shape of a hammer handle. As you drive it down, that swell on the handle all of a sudden becomes so thick that instead of compressing into the head, it just broke off on the sharp edges of the hammer hole. The good news is, the handle is now tight. We pushed it out about 3/8 to 1/4 of an inch. You see how much gap there is in there? That's really not good. That's such a shame. What we now need to do is find a way of wedging out the material enough that it fills the top of the eye. We've got a little bit of a dilemma here. They fitted it with both a wood wedge and my least favorite of wedges, the round wedge. What I like to do in hammers that I make is fit them only with a wood wedge and make sure it's a really good fit. That means that, God forbid, the handle does come loose in time. It's a natural material, and changes in humidity can make it happen. And not having a steel wedge in means that when it does come loose, you can drive the handle down and then install a steel wedge in that new climate. So it gives you that little extra opportunity to do it. Well, now there's a steel wedge, and all we can really do to try this is try driving the steel wedge in further, and I don't know if it's gonna work, because a round wedge doesn't really do a perfect job of spreading out the material the same way that first wood wedge does. This is why I don't like these wedges. They're impossible to drive any deeper than the wood. This is not gonna work. Oh boy. This was a useless wedge. I will no longer turn up my nose at this hammer, but I will strive to make it better. The reason I'm doing this is I want to make this accessible to you guys. I don't want to use all the fancy tools to get it done. I want us to try and do it a little more simply this time. The best thing to do now would be to put an entire new handle in and see if we can do it without doing that step. I want to show this in the easiest way possible. Okay, so as you saw, I took that ridiculous round steel wedge out of there. After driving the handle up through, I then pulled the wood wedge out, and I feel like if we had a wider wood wedge, we could indeed open up the wood enough that we got a good fit, maybe without even needing a steel wedge. So this is going to involve a little bit of woodworking. And now, my dear viewers and wonderful commenters, over the last many years, I have received a whole lot of flack for not actually having woodworking equipment. And at last, the peer pressure has pushed me to the breaking limit, and I want to show you some new toys that I got. Look at this! One contractor variety table saw, so that we can actually rip wood without needing to use that ridiculous battery-powered saw, as well as a thickness planer. Hugely exciting. I've wasted so much time, and I've made myself have to do so much rework and over-processing by not having woodworking equipment. Now we will solve that. We're still missing a woodworking bandsaw, so I need to grab one of those at some point. But for this project, we don't actually need to use any of that equipment. The metal bandsaw that we have is all we need. Because I already have a piece of hickory, we're gonna make the wedge from this. Here's what the wedge looks like, a few things. It is not wider than the eye itself, otherwise that won't work. It has a slight taper to it in this dimension, because eyes of hammers have a taper to them. I round the ends slightly to match up with the rounding of the eye. I also gave the end a very thin chisel grind. I also don't want to forget, you see how we have a chamfer on the top of the wedge? That's gonna save it from splitting. We're gonna wood glue the wedge in. Do notice that the bottom of the handle is supported. And we're gonna use the wood wedge to split the handle apart as it drives down. Starting to get pretty firm. We've actually cracked that wood wedge already. Not the end of the world. Flip it over, and then I'll hammer from the bottom of the handle. Since that wedge is starting to really fray apart, I know I'm not going to achieve anything by hammering it further. It's definitely tightened up the fit of the eye a good deal. We're going to grind off the top. Something really weird with the way this hammer's made. There's this lip here. See where that knife is hitting? So it looks like there's a whole lot more space than there actually is, because there's this weird lip. It's pretty well filled up. But there is that little lip in there at the top of the eye, which is throwing me off. So I'm gonna call the handle fit up ready. If it does come loose, I'll throw a steel wedge in. Next thing, we wanna deal with the actual handle itself, because it's nasty. It's got a varnish coating on it, which is going to give you blisters, and it's also this oval profile. I prefer handles that have a flat down the length of them. I also want a better chamfer on the end here. That's going to help reducing splitting the handle if you do ever have to redrive it. You can tackle this by locking the handle, not the head, in a vise and rasping on it to get rid of the varnish coating and creating your flat. You could also use one of these cheap belt sanders, or even use an angle grinder. For speed, I'll just use the belt grinder. We blackened the handle with a torch because I like the look of it. Also means it can look a little cleaner. You don't notice the dirt as much. Taking some pine tar. This is made as a byproduct of making charcoal from pine. It's got a beautiful smell to it, and it's going to help protect the wood. Linseed oil would also work an absolute treat for this. You really don't have to get too fancy. The handle now feels really good. It's a little slimmer up here than I'd like, but I'm happy with that. The idea is minimal effort, minimal money, making the hammer work like a more expensive one. Next step in the direction of that goal is for us to tackle the faces, and I'm gonna be doing it with an angle grinder because you can pick up an angle grinder for like 30 bucks, and just like anything, it's really a whole lot less about the tool than it is knowing what you're trying to achieve. So as you can see, the grinds here, flat across the top, and then there's just one chamfer on the edges. Here, we actually have a square with the corners broken off, and I like this. I like having this long, flat, and it has a much more gently sloping radius. So the first thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna flatten off the face, and then I'm going to take the angle grinder and I'm going to start at a very shallow angle, and I'm going to go back and forth, rounding my way around it to create a similar radius on the edges to this. I'm going to be using a 60 grit flap disc. You can pick these up anywhere, and by lightening the pressure you can achieve a better surface finish, but there are also finishing discs that you can use to get an even higher polish. For me though, more interested in the geometry. We got it done with the angle grinder. It's not as clean as it would be with a belt grinder, but it gets the job done. Next step is the rounding face. We need to turn this a little more into that. This isn't a ball though. The way Brown Brazil describes it is as a squashed ball. You have a very large radius at the top of the ball, and then a progressively smaller and smaller radius as you come around the sides of the faces. This means you have progressively more and more and more PSI that you can apply with the hammer to control how you move it. And so the trick as I round this is to make sure that the top is a much flatter radius than the edges, but it still wants to be a very gentle transition between the side of the hammer and the faces itself. It's definitely not as fancy as one of these forged hammers. It definitely doesn't have the fit and finish. It has longer proportions than I'd like. It's a rough old job, but it is gonna forge, and we're gonna prove it. It is so much nicer to forge with. Those edges give you so much more control. It's a much more consistent hammer blow because you know what those edges are gonna do. They're softer, there's less unsightly hammer marks. This is a hammer you could forge anything with. The difference in this hammer before and after is worlds apart. so much more pleasant to use, so much more control. You can get a much more aesthetically pleasing hammer mark in it. It's definitely not the best leaf I've ever made, but it's a lot better than the first one. Because the hammer wasn't wobbling on the handle, it felt so much more comfortable to use. And this, I hope, helps show that it's not all about the type of tools that you have. It's also about how you can modify those tools to work for you. Fundamentally, it's just about getting stuck in and giving it a go, because getting the experience and the practice is gonna mean so much more than having the absolute best tools. Now, after how simple this was, this only took a few hours to get this sorted. Why would you get one of these? Well, out of the box, it comes ready to go. It's beautiful, and beautiful things are nice to have. That's why I like having hammers like this, as opposed to like this. But you don't need this to get the job done. Before the video ends, I want to let you know we're going to be giving away a square circle rounding hammer, and you can have a chance of winning it simply by dropping a comment down below with a blacksmithing or bladesmithing question that you want answered that we might be able to help out with. We'll be picking a winner at random. Thank you guys so much. Drop that comment down below. See you soon. Bye.